is our agenda. Some of this sort of cross-populates, if you will, but all valid points in regard to what we're talking about with relationships with owners. So first, we're going to tell you how to create some FOMO. We're going to tell you how to stick to your guns, especially when it comes to demands that we might, recognize as unreasonable, but it's not to the owner. Contracts are really where it starts. So we're going to talk about creating a contract that appreciates like fine wine. And then scaling, right? That's the goal of most folks that we talk to anyway, is I'm at X units now, I want to be at Y units later. You end up running into walls as you scale on things that are unforeseen. And this is one of them that we'll be talking about. So avoid that. And then the expectations business, right? Where it all starts is vital. First impressions matter. And then how to frame the revenue side of things. I think we can agree, especially Jared and I, that a lot of the discussion around how to deal with relationships with owners revolves around revenue management and what we can do versus what the owner wants, what they think is right versus what we think is right. There's a lot that goes into this. And then finally, all the things that we just said not to do, we're going to tell you maybe you should do it. So you can bend, but we recommend don't break. So we'll talk about that too.
Starting us with FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So, how can we create a program where owners believe you get out what you put into it and encourage them, buy our rental program to invest in their property and make it better? So, out of the gate, for a loyalty program or referral program for owners, that is something that if you are looking to achieve scale quickly, you can do, but be mindful of that bottom line if you're going to have any sort of loyalty referral program for owners. Joining the portfolio, we have an option for unit tiers. And this doesn't need to be a tier, y'all. So some markets having I've seen platinum, gold, silver type deal from some of our users at conferences earlier this year, which is great. It may be that that's not an expectation we want to set for our particular market and depending on our particular product. So you can either have tiers of units to drive that improvement or a single tier, which meets your brand standards across the board. And the best part of all is in Streamline, you can make this up. Literally. So you can create a logo that's going to appear on that website, like a ribbon saying certified comfort property, right? And that might mean that it has the right thread count sheets, a Roku TV in every bedroom, right? And is up to date with the latest, lock for easy access for the guest. What that means to your portfolio, guys, could be totally different. So start kind of thinking about how can you give owners FOMO to want to improve their unit, because we can tell them and remind them till the cows come home that that wicker furniture is not going to cut it. However, them seeing their neighbor with a nice fancy ribbon on their listing on your website could be more affected, in my opinion, Kyle, than, calling them every single day yourself to ask them to do it, right?
Yeah, 100%. Another idea was like, you might just slip to some owners how much money or how much more money that group of owners makes because they have the Roku TV and all the things that, lend well to making more money. Yeah.
Oh, I'd be prepared to answer that question at the end of season because they might ask, if they're friendly with their neighbors, what did you do this summer? And we could say, well, Susie made X and I made Y. Well, Susie redid the kitchen, so that if it's dated and, not up to spec with guests ever changing and evolving expectations, that might be something that we come prepared for at the end of season, how to be better. To that same point, we can, rather than mention it ourselves, pass it on to the owner portal of a review that might mention something specific we've been reminding the owners of. And if they don't want to do it, that, reminder of, look, it's not just us. Everyone that stays in your unit actually calls out this specific thing that we could easily improve for a minimal cost and great return.
Absolutely. Anything else we want to mention, or are we going to move on?
No, I think that covers it. Kind of striking them, give them the FOMO rather than you convince them. The rest of the homeowners in their area will be more convincing than you ever could be, and will add that gravitas or clout to what you've already been saying.
Love it. Another thing we have, and you mentioned it, we have the owner portal, right? And what we have within that, I might mention this a few times on this call, is that you can use that news bulletin within the owner portal to tease this FOMO out. So the next time your owners log into the owner portal, they get that pop and it's like, hey, members of this loyalty program made 20% more year over year. That'd get me interested as an owner. Also, we have this polling coming out. Don't feel inclined to answer these, but we love data and we're interested to hear what you guys have to say. So vote on these polls. I was just told I'm not allowed to, so my vote doesn't count. So next, sticking to your guns, Jared, what do you got here?
Yeah. So, there are a lot of unreasonable owner demands we encounter, right? Where they're either missing the forest to the trees, totally, out of whack, or even suggesting something that might put us at legal liability, right? And potentially threaten our license depending on our regulation in our specific area. So, we want to open this up to the group. I'm going to go through a few different examples of some little wackadoodle, if I say so myself, requests I've received and my friends and colleagues have received over the years, but we want to hear from you guys. So feel free as we go through this exercise to put in the chat one of the most unreasonable requests you've ever received from an owner, and we can rap about that, perhaps, discuss a potential solution. So we'd love to be of help in that way. So I'm going to go ahead and go through a few of those examples. So one that puts us in legal liability clearly is going to be something like they're requesting credit card information of the guests. Now, that's against compliance. That's not something we can do. And for owners that want that level of control, it's important that we are able to say authoritatively, no, we can't do that. And in fact, anyone who would be doing that is breaking the law. So that's something where we can be clear with them, authoritative, and push up our glasses a little bit as we give them that answer so that we can, avoid, creating expectation where we put ourselves at risk. Another is, and this is a common one, and this does, I saw we have some folks in the Outer Banks in certain areas. Do note that, it varies by market, but having the ability to directly set rates, or at least that you're the final authority on rates somewhere in your agreement, even if we are working with them year over year for the rates for next year, is wise. And the reason it's wise is that there can never be this contractually escalated issue with rates with an owner that ultimately says, no, I will never take less than this number a night. We can refer back to that agreement to protect yourself. So definitely something to CYA, for our agreement. We're getting some notes in chat there. So that's a common one we see, and we'll touch upon that when we go over how to draft owner agreements. One funny one I've seen recently, Kyle, is also, boy, guys, owners writing in to us with what they see on their Ring cameras. I mean, it's nice if they're catching a guest that didn't pay the pet fee, but by and large, it's a support burden, I find, right? That they're scrutinizing the guests walking in and writing out that, hey, I don't like the look of this guest, for instance, and that's something where, just based on the appearance, we're not going to, take out that guest and violate our agreement to them. So that's something I've experienced where they babysit their Ring camera to a scary degree.
Yep.
What about, didn't you have something with one of the owners you've worked with in the past, Kyle, with something about succulents that they were calling out when they had, what's the deal with that you experience?
Yeah, well, I was in the luxury space, right? So the units I was managing were, 10,000 a night at times where there's, 12 bedrooms, these massive, massive places. And we were very hands-on, so we would show up and like walk through people through the property, show them how to use everything, get their phones connected. The clean was such a challenge of these units, right? Cleaning these units on back-to-backs generally, and then getting that dang pool heated and or cleaned was just the bane of my existence. Nonetheless, I got all of that done in my opinion, A plus, grading. But then the owner called or sent me a text of an image of a succulent that he thought was too dry. And I'm talking like the 69-cent succulents that are kind of just, decorative on the window seal of the kitchen where the sink is facing out or something. Just kind of ridiculous stuff. But that's where the lesson I learned there is that we need to, rewind before that moment because the owner had that expectation that the succulent should be watered. I did not have that expectation. So that was the sort of the miss there. Moving forward, my idea was let's make sure we set expectations. So what I did was have owners walk through their property and say, "Tell me what you expect out of the cleanliness of this unit." And then if something like that pops up, we can get on the same page with like, come on, bro, that's kind of ridiculous. We're doing all this
Yeah,
and 17 loads of laundry and this and that. We're going to get to these. We're not going to let them die, but they're not going to be wet 24/7. Anyway,
right.
that
And
was
you're
my
exactly right. Succulents are famously, for those who aren't familiar, from the rainforest region, and they need watering nearly every day, as far as I understand. There, that's what they are. But all jokes aside, right? It is important in that initial walkthrough, man, to ask those questions the first time us or our maintenance tech who's assisting us ever step foot in the unit. They ask those questions so we can refer back, to that when they bring up the succulents, right? We have ammo. If we didn't bring it up then they might have ammo on us that they brought up these things and we didn't bat it away or address it then, candidly. So it can really make or break that initial first step. You only get one chance to make that first impression, to your point.
Yep. Amen. So next up, the owner agreement, where it all starts. Maybe we should have started with this, but I got a few points here. To be honest, the first one, when I first learned about this, I was like, what the heck is an assignment clause? So, if in case you don't know, this is what allows you to transfer the contract if your business ends up getting sold, merged, restructured, whatever it might be. The world of M&A right now is at an all-time high. Even if you're not planning on selling and you're a legacy company, you could be finding yourself in a situation where an assignment clause is poignant to you. So, if your business evolves, your contract should move with you. You do not want to be in a situation where you have to renegotiate all of your contracts because you're moving on from the business. Additional shirt on their property. This is another one that's easily overlooked. Basically requires the property manager to be listed on the homeowner's insurance policy. So basically the talk point is like you're operating in this home daily. This ensures that you're actually protected when something goes wrong. Even more importantly, if you're trying to fix what is wrong, right? If you're playing this tag of communication between the owners and the insurance and all this, it's just a mess. So save yourself some heartache there.
Yeah, I want to reiterate those actually, if you don't mind. On the assignment clause, guys, if you don't have that assignment clause and other things of this list are all missing from that agreement, the best you might hope for in an exit is only getting paid on contracts they're able to convert over, which is, I'm pulling out my hair just now thinking about it. It's nightmare fuel, especially if you're getting long in the tooth and just want to go on your sunset cruise. This is going to prolong it or make it, not as nice of a cruise
I had
potentially.
a great point. I had talking with someone at a conference, right? That's exactly what she had told me is like, I bought a company with like 80 units, but I only got like less than 50% of it because of this exact reason. So she didn't get what she paid for, essentially. It's very, not a good situation to be in, essentially.
And then on the additional insured, like your only due means of recourse, if you don't have that on your owner policy and you're in a hurricane area, you're in an area that might have fires, right? Your only due means of recourse is then to sue your owner in court for the loss of rental revenue so you can pay your staff. So if you're a business leader and you're in one of those areas and you don't have that, feel free to even, if you want to chat about any of the line items on this and you're a Streamline user or not, we'd be happy to speak with you after the call on any of these. But really critical, you don't want to be tied up in litigation against your owners. Safe to say.
Yep, yep. So exclusive agency. So first caveat, asterisk, if you will, if you're in a market that this isn't possible, sorry. But if you are in a general vacation rental market, right, where you basically have full control over where and how this property is rented. So obviously we're talking about, we're preventing double bookings. It protects the guest experience. It just does everything for your business. Again, if you're in a market where that you just never have it, I'm sorry, I wish you did. but you can't optimize your revenue, operations, anything in this world if you don't have full management of that property.
Yeah, and let's talk about like I don't have it. I'm in Orlando. Let's say I grew up in Orlando, but it's a tough market for managers. A lot of them come to buy a visa to start a business, and they end up as really just doing a bunch of lawn work and not making a whole bunch of money. And so, what I might say, if you don't have that exclusive agency right now, guys, and you want it, what you can say to owners, listen, I don't want to compete against you. You have your listing, and I'm paying for dynamic pricing, distribution, marketing, all these different tools. If you list it for 150 a night in peak season and I'm at 300, I think I can get you the 300, Mrs. Robinson, but I can't if you're selling it for 150. Then we're competing against each other. I don't want to compete against you. I want to partner with you. And that's a good line to get you to that exclusive agency, so long as it's not like a state requirement you don't have it, because Massachusetts got some crazy laws in that regard. But yeah. So sorry, folks, in Mass, but everyone else.
Yeah. So, and then for sale clause, another one that's I think easily overlooked. Just establish what happens in the agreement if they do sell the home. So it protects you from sudden loss of inventory. It really defines the process. And then we all, again, I feel bad that we're saying it over and over, but a ton to set rates. Like we've just heard so many horror stories of expectations from owners, or owners don't necessarily want to set rates, but they want to have their say because, they watched, a show or something like that, or they learned something from someone where I never want to go above this rate or go below this rate. Now, Streamline has features where I can be like, great, Mr. Owner, I will never put your owner below this rate. And there's some instances that makes a lot of sense. But there's certain instances where it's like, dear owner, let me educate you on why I want to do this and why it makes sense
Mhm.
for both of us to make money. That's really where it's stemming from. And we have a lot more to talk about that too when it comes to like occupancy and other things, but I'm not going to steal our own thunder here. It's a tease, if you will. Anything else you got, Jared?
No, I think, you're exactly right. It's critical to, if you have the ability to set rates autonomously to do so, even if it's a process like a conversation you have with them, ultimately that contractually lays with you all is the important thing.
Yep. So next, scalable processes. We have so many challenges in the world of like property care and linens and things like that that we can, serve for on the streamline side. But when it comes to the relationship, right? The idea is different owner, same process. So consistency is absolutely key. Standard workflows reduce errors, confusion. Your best operators don't reinvent the wheel for every owner, right? They execute the same
Mhm.
playbook at a high level. What I think is important here is the communication piece, right? So when an owner, doesn't think they match up with this process and they want something different, I think you should all be singing from the same tune, right? As far as like why we do this. If your property manager is saying why we do this and then they call the owner and the owner has a different story, that can get muddy the water, right? And then training, right? Are they new to the industry? Educate them on the industry in more ways than you think, right? Especially when it comes to setting expectations early through education. But I would be providing, onboarding guides and welcome materials, and these welcome materials or guides would probably change over time because if I onboard Jared as my new owner and give him these materials, and then Jared calls me with four more questions, what questions would I add to that material? The four questions
Yeah.
Jared asked, right? So that the next time those expectations. What I loved about my time at Marriott is that you learn to anticipate their needs before they're even asking for them. So that's my idea with a lot of this is like anticipate needs, solve for the needs, and then move on. It's very common to what Jared said earlier, the FOMO, right? Everyone wants to be in the club. So any sort of exclusivity that you can create for top performing units or tiers or badges, like he said. But what we're also seeing is straight up two different Airbnb accounts. We have an Airbnb account for my high-end luxury brand or type of units, and then I have another Airbnb account for everyone else. Not that they're less than, but they're just that different that we want two different accounts. When owners see what looks great, they actually want to get there too. So when they see what looks great or works great, they want it too, typically.
Yeah, for sure.
And then rough first dates, right? First impressions absolutely matter. if you get off to the wrong foot, you're going to spend the next year just trying to fix it. When it's like a guest that gave you a poor review, right? You just didn't know about it. It's a simple thing that you could have fixed. It was the source of that bad review, and you just hate it because, like, if you just knew about that guest issue, you would have fixed it, and then you would have had a good review. Same thing with owners. Get off to the right foot. Be organized. Be the expert. Be the authoritative expert on this industry, especially if they're new, and then have
Mhm.
your backup, right? On why this works, right? Have KPIs, have history of I did this and this is how it worked. Scalability isn't about doing more. It's just about doing the right thing at the right time. Another thing that I've seen maybe sort of handcuff some companies is you're afraid to change. This is how we do it. This is how we did it with 50 units. If you have 100 units now or 150 units now, you should probably not be doing it the same way. In fact,
Right.
almost certainly shouldn't be doing it the same way. So don't be afraid to just be like, this isn't working, we're changing it, right? That's something that's very common, what I hear anyway.
And I so agree and empathize with, if they're a new homeowner to the industry, guys, either we tell them, give them your definition of what a good homeowner is. If you do not define it with like a PDF they receive after signing, materials about what the next steps are and how your process works and why it works, they're going to go on Reddit and like an Airbnb Reddit thread is going to define, and you don't want that. So be proactive with that sort of thing when folks join you. And, you'll pay yourself back in spades from all the issues you don't hear about because they had that expectation set elsewhere and you really don't want that.
Yep. So we're all going to run into the Karens, and this is how you can, deal with the Karens. And I could say that my mom's name is Karen. She's not a Karen as if we're talking about it. She's a lovely woman. And I guess we got bad names. I'm a Kyle, and Kyle's drink Red Bull and punch holes in walls. I'm not that Kyle either, I guess. So anyway.
Yeah, but yeah, I love that. Like rough date and rocky marriage is actually a quote from my nana. So I
Oh
don't know if
yeah.
she knows she's being her quote's being used on our webinar today, but I'm sure she'd be proud. If it's a rough first date, it's not gonna get better when you get married. Yeah.
That's a good one.
So
Expectations.
once we talk about expectations, the most common thing we see, in my experience, I've seen is folks want to talk about ADR. They want to talk about occupancy. Very few folks want to talk about occupancy and ADR, right? So anytime in a typical, setting that first expectation scenario, whether you are already bringing on an owner that first signed and are helping them set up things, or you're on the sales side, seeing if they might be a good fit, and sending them an agreement. It's important to call out. Likely they've talked to, maybe if they're purchasing home, like an agent on the real estate side. He's given them some information, perhaps, but maybe he simply, we might suppose, wants them to sign and buy the home. So he's going to say whatever. So you have that opportunity then to be the authority. And, a lot of times when you do it right, you hear, boy, I talked to you for 15, 30 minutes and I learned more than I did on 4 hours talking to agents or something like that, because you're saying, well, we can't look at ADR or occupancy in a vacuum. When owners would ask, what occupancy can you get me? You should always take the opportunity to say, well, 100%. But what if I told you you could be at 80% occupancy with 120% of the rate? Would you be interested in that? And that's kind of your foot in the door, because perhaps, depending on how competitive your market is, you might be the first person to suppose that to them, and they're going to paradigm shift the way they're thinking about their new property,
That
right?
was another sort of light bulb moment. I don't know when it happened to me, but when I first started learning about revenue management, occupancy should be at 100%. If we're at 100% occupied, we're good, right? A plus, let's get away. No, that is wrong. I was wrong. So that's something that a lot of owners just do not understand, which when it comes to education, that's why we're doing it, helping them
And going
understand.
back to that, if you combine and tie ADR to occupancy to a year-over-year number, and you point to that and you establish that as the goal. Let's say it's 42,000, Kyle, just
Yeah.
the average vacation rental earning. 42K, Kyle, we're forecasting 67% occupancy, right? And 42K really. So, that's our goal, is that 42. And anytime, guys, if we set that expectation, do you want to do 42? We're going to have to market it maybe differently than you originally planned. I know you wanted a flat rate for summer, but we think we can do better with varying that a bit more than you have in the past and getting them to agree that they also want 42K, right? Maybe they're 10K less than that now or something, 7K less. Getting them to agree, guys, you get them to buy in to that number and that shared goal. And then they're going to call you in 2 months and they're going to say, at the end of summer, I don't like how low the rates are getting. I don't like it. I'm not happy. And you'll say, okay, well, Mrs. Robinson, so glad you reached out. When we originally spoke, did we agree on 42K and that's we're going to ultimately have that end of year goal for your property? Is that what we discussed? They're going to say yes. So, well, we need to go lower in the shoulder season to keep your place booked to achieve that goal. It is not about the nightly price per night. Once we're out of peak, it's about reaching that ultimate number. So keep their eyes on the prize. And as my old man used to say, count the money at the end of the year versus look at, one-off metrics of ADR or occupancy in a vacuum. So in that
And this
similar
will,
vein, we're not for everyone telling people that. Similar to like, wanting them to be in a club. But even if you're doing a walkthrough of a property that you're like, wow, we'd be lucky. We would be lucky to get this home in the portfolio. You can still say, listen, we're not for everybody. We're going to have to do a very thorough walkthrough to see if this is going to be a good fit for our portfolio. And never vary from saying that, in my opinion, because you want to set that expectation that you have standards. And hopefully you do have some very strong brand standards. But if not, maybe look into how you can standardize, how you stock items for units, etc. So that's something that we could always say to set expectations with owners to let them know we're not for just anybody. And then it's establishing those boundaries, right? You can draw back either your initial call with the owner is going to be your kryptonite or your linchpin. And the course of the call is going to determine how the rest of that history goes, right? So either, we establish those clear goals for revenue and what our portfolio standards are, or we didn't, and they're going to make our lives less fun, because we won't be able to point back to that original conversation that we can refer all future conversations back to of what expectations we set. So strong contract for the worst case. If they want to nitpick something in your agreement, say, listen, I'm sure this won't apply to you. We do have, this is for the worst case, and this is Kyle's laughing. This is something we are salespeople, so do keep that in mind. But it's a good tip, right? So that those contract nitpicks for something that's one off, getting them to not make that exception versus simply sign it by saying, hey, this is for the worst case scenario. I'm sure that you're not this type of person that this was worded for, and I don't foresee it being an issue with us. I just want to let you know that sometimes that can get folks over the hump. So another way that we can set those expectations versus make an exception to our agreement,
well,
because the more exceptions we want, and probably I should have led with this, honestly, Kyle, as like an opening statement. But guys, the folks that have 10 units or 12 units, and they call us and they talk to Kyle and I and say, I'm trying to scale, I just can't. Well, why can't you? Well, I do something that's just Susan. She always has to have her owner agreement set up this way. Oh, Bob needs a different guest booking owner confirmation. And that's the majority of cases where they can't seem to scale. It is because they have a different process for each owner. They've bent over backwards to do everything for people. And when you give a mouse a cookie, it always wants more cookies. So you'll be cookieless, if you make exceptions for every owner in the portfolio.
yeah, all great points, my man. I kept on thinking about things I wanted to mention, and then you just made another great point. Couple things. You're doing what we told people to do in regard to, this is a thing on the contract just in case. It's not going to be you. What to me you're doing is telling the owner what kind of owner you want them to be. You're just kind of pushing them down that path, right? Because if you're telling me that, I'm like, okay, I'm never going to ask about that because clearly it's someone that's given an issue. And then the owner that says, hey, Jared, it's shoulder season and these rates are super low. Another tactic is like, listen, we could go lower, but if I go lower and at the end of the year we don't hit your 42,000, is that going to be okay? That's, and I'm not saying anything until the owner answers. Just by the way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
but
all
just
good points.
reframing what we've already said so we keep it
Yes.
in the context of our original expectation. Exactly.
Yep. Love it. Starting, this is kind of the same discussion that we're going to continue down the road, but occupancy versus revenue. And then this is another thing, the data that we're using to set rates, right? Marketing versus transactional data. Jared, what do you got?
Yeah. So we talked a bit about occupancy versus revenue, right? That's a very common one. I would even include information, about those potentially on your property management sign up page on your website. So that's an opportunity to even have that information on the page about how you manage that for folks so that they can see the difference and the keywords will pick it up. And that's something that as more folks look for management companies from chat, having clear answers about how you do that and why. Chat will pick that up, guys. So that's something to keep in mind for the future. Get five. You may not need to do it this year, but 5 years from now, if you haven't done it, you're gonna be getting hit in the face by a wave of change.
Yeah.
So the other point of that is something else that we can call out, and this is marketing versus transactional data. So Kyle, believe it or not, a lot of property managers I speak with aren't fluent in the difference between marketing versus transactional data. So the difference between those is marketing data, guys, is going to be scrape data. It's looking at Verbo, it's looking at Airbnb, looking at people's websites potentially, and it's making assumptions based on the availability of those units, that those units booked or not for that period because they're unavailable now. So that's one type of getting data. There's also transactional data. So transactional data is going to be rent rolls, real anonymized rent rolls for the other folks if you're in a building or neighborhood next door or nearby, so that you can show you have this breadth of experience and give very detailed information about what you could do for them and what you've done for others. It's important to be clear with owners. A lot of other folks may not be so candid, okay, about what type of data they're sharing with potential owners or already signed owners. So you want to distinguish that. Call it out. You can paint the competition potentially as less than honest because they're not sharing where they got their data from. Oh, you've not heard of market and transactional data? Well, what did the other guys send? Oh, it looks like it was that, but it doesn't seem like they clarified how they got that to you. So by being clear and setting very candid expectations in regards to how you got that data, you can paint yourself as the only ones that are being honest, the only ones that are setting good expectations and giving them the real information. And if they feel that way, guys, they're going to sign themselves. I mean, that pin is going to, you don't even know how fast they could sign that contract if they've convinced themselves that everyone else kind of told them a story, whereas you were as clear as possible with what their unit could do and how you got there. So it's not that you only want to use one or the other of these. In my opinion, it's best to use both. And if you have less units in an area, market data can be more valuable. If you have less supply lines, and transactional data is typically better if you already have quite a few units in the portfolio in that area. And I'd reckon if you're doing that and you followed our earlier advice, right, about adding a page for those communities, you're just going to get people on your website that want to work with you because it's good enough for their neighbors and they're not trying to reinvent the wheel to find a company that might do an okay job in that building, right? So being really clear about what kind of data we're using and where does it come from can win you new business and help frame the future of that relationship.
Love it. And one thing that was a sort of misconception or another underlooked lever to pull is on the revenue side. We have a Scott Leggett on our team. He's dubbed the godfather of vacation rentals because literally been around forever and owned and managed and done all the things. Right now, he leads Inhabit's advocacy division. So, by the way, if you're getting beat up by the hotels or regulations, laws, Scott Leggett is someone that you might want to talk to and learn about. But what he says is that, well, I'm gonna ask a question, let you guys think for a second, then I'll give you the answer. What percent of your revenue should come from what we're talking about here, meaning setting your rates? If I'm a property management company and I have 50 units and I'm setting rates and I'm only getting, 20% of that because that's my cut with the owner getting 80%, that's one chunk of my revenue. You also have fees and everything like that. So that's my question is what percent of your revenue comes from our revenue management and what percent comes from fees? So 3, 2, 1. Scott Leggett says 50% of your revenue should come from fees.
Just
Fee
put that in the chat. I think he was right, said it right as you spoke it, Kyle. So shout out
Perfect.
Miles in the chat for that.
So that
Congrats.
was another
That is the
interesting.
exact right answer. I wonder if he was on our last week webinar. We also touched on that because it's
Oh,
about fee
perfect.
management.
I love it, Miles. And sorry other people can't see that. I realize that only the hosts and panelists can see these chats. I wish we were all hanging out together in the chat, but great call out, Miles. And it is 50%. That's something, Jared, that you mentioned when you were managing your company. That was a lever that you were able to pull if you were struggling with the revenue management side of things. Tell me how you'd pull a lever on the fee side of things, right?
Yeah, fee management. I mean, it's going to change with, is your market more saturated, less than it was last year? It's not something you can just static set and forget. And that is the common wisdom in the space is that that's the case, and it's simply untrue. So you could either be losing conversion or losing potential revenue. To be clear about that fee question you asked, Kyle, guys, one thing I clarified last week, I'll also clarify this week. Fee revenue is not equivalent to fee profit, right? A lot of that is covering OpEx for channels and areas, listing sites, commissions, etc. Various sorts of OpEx. It's simply that 50% of your top line revenue to come from that.
Yep. All right, so we're coming to a close here. We'll get to Q&A here after this slide. So if you got some questions, start firing away and we'll try to get to some. But like I said, one thing in this industry is that none of you are alike, especially market to market, right? That's one thing I've heard Steve Schwab that now, took over and learned his lessons. He went and tried to just copy paste his, franchises all across the country and it just bombed. Every single market's a bit different. That comes with owner expectations. It's almost just weird, to be honest, how different from town to town owner expectations can be, even though they're relatively close. So, with all that to say, don't do this, don't do this. You can still bend, right? I would never just say, lock this rule into cement and you're never changing anything, right? So, you got to be selective with certain homeowners. We've mentioned it. If you have a homeowner that's like, this guy's got the biggest house in the neighborhood, and I want to put this guy's unit first on all my website searches, I would be flexible for this guy. But you just don't want to cross that line. And if you're flexible with everyone, it becomes chaos, right? Custom communication where it matters. I just bring this up on every single sales call. If you got that owner that's kind of just needy and wants to know everything happening with their unit, Streamline has a massive amount of triggers where I'm going to be like, bet, Mr. Owner, I'm just going to flood your text, your push notifications to the owner portal and your email with every time you get a new reservation, a reservation is modified, a property care work order, an inspection has happened, go check it out in your property care or your owner portal with the property care area to see all those details. We mentioned it already, stole the thunder there, but separate channel profiles when appropriate. We have separate Airbnb accounts along with separate Verbo accounts now, which is fairly new if you don't know about that and kind of want it or need it, chat with us. But not every home needs to be stand out, right? Some homes should stand out. So know the difference and plan accordingly. And then flexible with reporting and statements as well. This is another area where we just launched like ACH payments inside Streamline, right? I can click a couple buttons, I'm done. Owners are paid, they're getting the PDF copies in their email, and the owner portal is updated. But, I can't just change everything for all the owners, right? Some owners don't want ACH payments. I want the printed check. Okay, we can make that happen. We can do a separate group. But some companies are like, no, you're getting ACH, or I'm not going to work with you. Not every owner needs to have a different process, but they do need to have visibility in the way it makes sense to them and why you're doing things. Again, this is a very gray area or muddy watered area that I'm talking about, in my opinion, but that I just encourage you all to find the white space and try to work within it if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, and if it helps, there's an owner pivot grid. Anyone who'd like it, we showed it last week. However, I'd be happy to share it with anyone who's interested. They can help you make these decisions, especially if you're a business development rep of the team, like we can be willing to do more for someone who'll do 150K than 50K or, things of that nature. So you can put the value of that account and map it, with the extra lift and time it may take the team to service it. So if you are considering tweaking versus changing your process, there are tools you can use that we'd be happy to share with you guys to make those informed decision. Another thing is, if you are in a scaled portfolio, ask your business development rep if they know they can do that. They might just be in the trenches of trying to sign owners. And if you're on the operations side, link up with them, let them know, what things they can automate so they can be better at setting those expectations and not make stuff your problem.
I always have a
Yes.
caveat when talking revenue. If the economy is stable, there are no circumstances beyond your control. So avalanches, wildfires, then yeah, set the revenue. Wait, your set revenue management get your expectations get met, essentially. Good point.
We also have a question from Kathy. She says, you say 50% should come from fees. What are those fees?
So
Yeah.
that's a deep rabbit hole, but markup fees, admin fees, in Streamline, the markups on work orders is probably the more popular one, where if I create a work order as the property management company, we're spending a lot of time on logistics and doing this. So I will create an automatic markup on every work order that when we process that and we're charging against an owner, part of that cut comes to me. That's a big one.
Yeah.
What else do you got, Jared?
Yeah, well, what works for what I would say, it is a great question. What works when it's also a loaded question, right? It's going to be very particular to your specific market, but there are some generalities we can speak about. So, in this regard, if we have a property management company in Myrtle Beach, what fees are going to work there is going to be radically different, guys, than some cabins outside of Asheville and Maggie Valley. So there's going to be all sorts of different ways linens are managed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to vary dramatically. The golden rule that works across any portfolio in any market, in my opinion, is be concerted and intentional with your fee setup. If you have something that's supposed to cover a channel markup, review that in the by fee by vendor report in the system at the end at a routine cadence, either monthly, quarterly, right? And be intentional in other ways. Like if I markup cleans $10, this should help pay for a housekeeping coordinator, for example, is one I like to use, but also booking fee revenue or admin fee revenue, whatever you call it. We all have a different name. You can map that to your reservations team, operating expenses. So be intentional about mapping when you have a fee, have it cover a certain line item in your OPEX or multiple, and then understand and adjust those fees if I had to hire new people. We got to adjust, what we're doing on the top line so that we can afford the team we need on the bottom line. So that's something I would say to be mindful of, along with like supply and demand in your local area.
Two more things I thought about in regard to fees that I'm finding, companies finding revenue in. We have what's called StreamSign Pro that connects to Rental Guardian. So if you upsell insurance, that absolutely should be a revenue driver for you. And what StreamSign Pro allows you to do is you send the agreement to the guest and they sign up for Rental Guardian right there. So it's almost like a second opportunity to sell them that because you're selling them, insurance on a few different bases. If they decide to sign up for, the Rental Guardian on that agreement, it automatically updates your folio inside Streamline. Zero manual effort needs to take place. So again, if we're at scale, this is an awesome, awesome feature that helps generate more revenue, and it's a feature set for your guests. The other thing I was going to say is we have Happy Stays, the guest app. A lot of companies just don't want to deal with this because it seems like a nuisance, to be honest. But concierge services, I could not believe how much more money people were asking me for, right? They wanted a private chef, they wanted pool heat, they wanted I even sold the IVs to guys, that were super hungover. A nurse came over and gave them IV bags before they flew out. Early check-ins, late checkouts. Honestly, I gave those away a lot to try to get a good review, but all of these things could be ancillary revenue sources. Good question.
Yeah, and then we also have Miles has another good question here. How are we supposed to handle a market that has a ton of property managers? No shortage, right? So companies are available and owners leverage that when they threaten to leave. So my advice, Miles, would be as follows. draw your lines in the sand before that ever occurs, that convert, because it will occur, right? They're gonna say, I'm not happy, and it will happen. What you want to do is know what you're okay to let them walk away from. Like if they want to set rates and they've decided that this other company with 10 units is going to solve all their problems because they're going to let them dictate rates and all this stuff that sounds fantastical, know that that's your line in the sand, and say, listen, we'd love to work with you. We have this amount booked for the future. Keeping their units booked is sometimes more important. And this is like a conversation I have with revenue managers. If they're cantankerous, get their unit booked. They don't want to have to deal with the pain of walking away from a booked unit if they have revenue in the future on the calendar. So I can deal with a lot more from an owner if I know I dropped their rate so they're going to get booked than one that has an open calendar. It's a lot more scary, I would say, A. But, having your line of sand, what you're willing to compromise on and what you're willing to absolutely not compromise on, and planning that before it ever gets to that point is the one piece of advice. But good luck out there, man. It is tough when there's plenty of companies that do a good job. It's definitely makes it interesting.
Well, and then we're building features for that too, right? Because,
Yeah.
we're building like homeowner retention tools, if you will. So sending KPIs just to your owners that you haven't talked to about, like, how happy are you? How you doing? What's new? Just keeping in touch with them through software and automation, I think is going to help a lot. There was one more point I was going to make too, but I forgot about it now. All good.
We've also got a question from Roxanne. Roxanne would like to know, what is a standard markup for work orders?
Very small.
There's not a standard markup like across the
It's not
board that
standard,
people are
but
going to use.
what
Yeah.
I see is between like 1% and 5%.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can be transparent or less transparent with owners about that. But it's very common across the industry. So if an owner does sort of gripe about it, that's what I would say. It's a very common thing.
And you can on the fly adjust that, like, depending on your role in the organization or if you're a business leader or not. You could say, this is a big project. It's very expensive. We promised him we wouldn't upcharge the HVAC. So I'm going to use the new feature in Streamline to upload a receipt, even of that work getting done at 0% markup, right? And another case by case, like this is the owner keeps leaving the unit with, let's say some beach chairs, or they bring them home again. And it's the third time this has happened. And of course, the only reason the guest booked the unit was the beach chairs. So in that instance, I might be like, I'm tired of this. And I might hit, a higher markup. So you can do it case by case. And I would be careful about one markup to rule them all, so to speak.
I thought about what I was going to say when talking about Miles' question, right? When you have an owner manager that's talking to this owner at first that's, threatening leaving, making sure that they're saying the same thing, because you don't want your owner manager to say, yeah, we might be able to do that for you. And then they go to Jared, who's drawn his line in the sand, and be like, I ain't doing that. So just another thing to just make sure you're communicating with the team to all say that you're saying the same things. But yeah, that is,
Singing the same hymn book. Yeah,
yeah,
that's important.
exactly. And yeah, just figuring out whether or not they're just trying to get something out of you or actually thinking about leaving is another thing. Like they just need more TLC is what I think is the case a lot of the time. Any last words of advice, Jared? Otherwise, I think we can just go ahead and hop off and let people have some time back.
No, I think we covered it all. We
Okay.
appreciate everyone joining us today for our webinar. Hope we were able to add some value to your day to day. And we want to wish you guys the best of luck if you're in the middle of prime season in summer right now. Best of luck to you. And, we hope you have a fantastic rest of your season.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. And if you guys need to reach out to us, Jared and I are more than happy to talk shop with you all anytime.